Oh, Abba, Father, it's me. I'm on my knees to pray. I once was lost, but you found me. So others don't see your face. My soul longs for those around me to walk in your ways. So Father, hear me as I pray. Here Adonai, Zavo, Lord, I'm on my knees, all down, I'm going to praise your holy name. Here Adonai, Zavo, Lord, you're most high God. On my knees, arms down, I've come to praise your holy name. Tears I've cried, you see. And Father, you know my heart. I'll do what you ask of me, so others may bow and say, you're Adonai, Zabo, Lord, you're most high God. I'm on my knees, arms are down, I've come to praise your holy name. You're Adonai, Zabo, Lord, you're most high God. I'm on my knees, arms are down, I've come to praise your holy name. Let your spirit live in me, so I will die and live in you. Let your spirit live in me, so I will die and live in you. Let your spirit live in me, so I will die and live in you. Let your spirit live in me, so I will die and live in you. Adonai, Zabo, Lord, you're most high God. I'm on my knees, hold you down, I'm going to praise your holy name. You're Adonai, Zabo, Lord, you're most high God. I'm on my knees, hold you down, I'm going to praise your holy name. Your holy name, Zabo.
Right. So before we continue, if you'd see Devarim chapter 8, verse 10, it says, so you'll eat and be satisfied, and you'll bless Adonai your God for the good land he has given you. So let's do that. Abba, we've eaten and we're satisfied. We thank you for the land. It's in Yeshua's name. Amen. All right. So according to the traditional account of Rambam, there are X number of mitzvot for this portion. Psych, we're not going to play that game today. We're going to play a different game. This game is, which one of these is not like the others? Which one of these isn't counted in this Torah portion? All right. So it's only one. It's only one shot here. So which one is it? Which one of these isn't a mitzvah counted from this Torah portion? Is it to love the stranger, to love Yahweh your Elohim, to fear Yahweh your Elohim, to serve Yahweh your Elohim? Which one of these is the mitzvah, or as a mitzvah, is not counted from this Torah portion? Who says it is to love the stranger? Any votes for that? Okay, so that's in there. Is that in there or out of it? Which one is saying is that? Okay, which one which one is out of it? Which one is not from this portion? To love the stranger? Not counted from this Torah portion. That's correct.
So all of these are in there,
but they're not counted.
Yes, I'll give you a hint. Yes, all of these are in this Torah portion. One of them is not counted from this Torah portion of the 613 mitzvot.
so that one's the one that's not like the other.
Which one is not like the others? Is it to love the stranger? Okay. Which one is to love? Which one is to love Yahweh your Elohim? Is not from this portion.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to go with that one.
Okay, JD says that one. Who votes for to fear? Okay, he says not from this portion. Okay, and who says to serve is not from this portion? And finally, E. Who's afraid to vote? Who's afraid to be afraid to vote? Who's afraid to raise your hand? Ah, gotcha. There's no A, B, C, and D. No, I decided to not use letters in the English alphabet. So the answer is to love. That's counted from last week's portion, ve'ahavta, and you shall love. Yep, it's counted from last week's portion. Now, it's in 11:13. It's actually in a second place as well. It's in here twice, actually. But it's not counted from this Torah portion, it's counted from last week's portion. Stunned silence. Okay.
Not stone silence, it's stunned.
I said stunned.
Well, anyway, to explain, sometimes they're counted in a later portion, sometimes they're counted from an earlier portion. We literally would be guessing.
You'd be guessing, yeah. That's all right. So, JD, would you hand these here?
I will. Oh, so you didn't tell us what the total count was that are counted from this week's portion.
It's 8. You'll have a handout in just a second. There are 2 negatives and 6 positives that are counted from this Torah portion.
So I was wondering if the commandment to keep the commandments is going to be on the list.
Commandment to keep the commandments.
Well, that's one of the commandments.
You bet it is. One of the 613 seeds of a pomegranate.
It's not from American pomegranate. We think we counted that. It was like, we had a lot more. Maybe not in Oklahoma. Still America. You can go everything. You can go everything in California. That's why it is what it is. All right. So that's the mitzvot. Take a look at those. So they're on the ones that we talked about are on the slide list. Are on this one.
As you're looking at the thing, if you notice there's an N or a P next to it, that means a negative commandment or a positive commandment.
Yep.
And so a negative commandment, just to reiterate, isn't the difference between right and wrong or good and bad. It's a negative commandment means when God says you will not do this. If it's a positive commandment, God says you will do this. So positive and negative isn't good or bad or plus or minus like that. It's just you will or you won't. They're all
Do and don't.
right. It's not, don't think of a negative commandment as being something negative, because it's really not.
So it's a positive if you don't do a negative commandment. Or I mean. All right. All right. So we have Parsha points from 119. Hopefully those plays for us in just a moment.
Welcome to another episode of Parashah Points, short thoughts from the weekly Torah portion. This week's Parashah point comes from Eiqev, which is Hebrew for if you follow, and it goes from Deuteronomy 7:12 to Deuteronomy 11:25. This Torah portion lists blessings for obeying God and warnings against forgetting God in times of prosperity. Israel is then told not to think that God is giving them the promised land because of their righteousness. They are reminded of the times they provoked God through their rebellion and of the events surrounding the golden calf incident. Then they are exhorted to circumcise their hearts and follow God's commandments. The parashah concludes with more promised blessings for obedience. There's a lot we can talk about in this Torah portion. Today, we're going to talk about having a changed heart. Deuteronomy chapter 10. And now, Israel, what does Yahweh your God require of you? But to fear Yahweh your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve Yahweh your God with all your heart and with all of your soul, and to keep the commandments and statutes of Yahweh, which I am commanding you today for your good. Behold, to Yahweh your God belong heaven and the heaven of heavens, and the earth with all that is in it. Yet Yahweh set his heart and love on your fathers and chose their offspring after them, you above all peoples, as you are this day. Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart, and be no longer stubborn. In this passage, Moses commands Israel to circumcise their hearts, which metaphorically speaks of removing the stubbornness from their hearts. This instruction is connected to the previous statements about Yahweh's requirements of Israel, that they fear him, walk in his ways, and love and serve him with their whole heart. So truly walking in faithfulness and obedience to God requires circumcision of the heart. To the ancient Hebrews, the heart represented the seat of your thoughts, emotions, and will. Moses is telling God's people that the inward core of who they are needs to change in order to be completely submissive to God. Their hearts must change. This commandment raises an important question. How do we change our hearts so we can truly walk in obedience? Paul wrestles over this same question in Romans. He speaks about how he delights in the law of God, but there is another law waging war within him, making him captive to sin. What is Paul's answer to this dilemma? He goes on to explain that because the Messiah came and condemned sin in the flesh, the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us, who walk not according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. In this passage, Paul is recalling prophecies from the Old Testament. These prophecies speak about how God will write his law on our hearts and put his Spirit within us to empower us to follow his commandments. Paul taught that these prophecies were being fulfilled in light of Yeshua's work on the cross. So it's by receiving the Messiah that our hearts change. We get a new heart, as Ezekiel said. By walking in the Spirit, we are able to overcome our own stubborn will and follow God with our whole heart. For a more detailed look at this topic, please see our teaching, How to Circumcise Your Heart. Thank you for joining us for another Parashah Point. We pray that you've been blessed by this teaching, and remember, continue to test everything. Shalom.
Okay, so a couple of different translations of the word Eiqev. If is one of them. You see from the NIV translates it as if you pay attention. New American Standard, for example, uses because in this one. I think I prefer because as a positive. What happens when you do this? This is what will happen. So I kind of like the because translation versus the if translation, and we'll see that in just a minute. We'll look at where there is an if side of this. So another way to look at it, it's not just between NIV and New American Standard. It's also a difference between different Jewish translations as well. The Art Scroll has when, but the new JPS, New Jewish Publication Society version uses if. So it's not really saying one version is better than the other in that sense, but it's spread apart. When it's not just when is only from Art Scroll. No, it's also from New American Standard. If is not just from NIV, it's also from JPS. ISR uses because, as does the Complete Jewish Bible. So the way I look at it, I think, is if and or because or when you shema these mishpatim and shamar them, then you'll get the blessing. The root word of Eiqev is the same word as heel, same word as Jacob, if you will. Jacob is derived from Eiqev. It literally means heel. So if you will heed, and this is what Rashi comments on, if you will heed the commandments which one usually tramples with his heels, which a person treats as being of minor importance. That's the because or if idea behind that. And that's Rashi's take on it. It's not necessarily the only take that could be done with that. We see that this is where we see the holding the heel. That's where Eiqev appears as Eiqev in Bereshit, Genesis chapter 25. The catches by the heel is the meaning of the word Yaakov. And you can see it as perhaps on another English phrase, on the heels of, means something is just about to happen or has just happened. So what is the covenant that's being spoken of here? We see the covenant to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob being spoken of here in this Torah portion. This covenant is hearkening back to that from Genesis, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Yaakov. That's where this covenant transfers through. So what share do you have in these covenants, plural, of promise? You can check it out in the writings of Paul in Ephesians chapter 2 and in Galatians 3:29. Let's go to the Galatians verse first, and we'll kind of look at what share or what role do you have in the promises given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's the last Galatians verse is the last verse in chapter 3 of Galatians. And it reads this way from the Complete Jewish Bible: also, if you belong to Messiah, you are seed of Abraham and heirs according to the promise. So if you're to be seed of Abraham, is the idea behind that is the covenant that goes through Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. It's the same covenant between those. And the seed of Abraham is inherits that covenant. And according to this passage, according to what Paul said, if you belong to Mashiach, you are the seed of Abraham and heirs according to the promise. So that means that this lineage isn't necessarily based on DNA. It's based on something else. I think that Paul would say it's based on faith or trust in the God of Abraham through the Messiah. So if you turn now to to Ephesians chapter 2, and we're not going to read the whole section of this, but the passage kind of goes from 2:11 through 22, and you could actually maybe even start a few passages earlier than that. But chapter 2:11 in the King James read, "You time past Gentiles." The Complete Jewish Bible reads, "Therefore remember your former state, you Gentiles by birth, called the uncircumcised by those who merely because of an operation on their flesh are called the circumcised. At that time, had no Messiah, you were estranged from the national life of Israel. You were foreigners to the covenants, plural, embodying God's promise. You were in this world without hope and without God." So so when the King James reads time past Gentiles, it means that there's a change of state. Time past. In times past, you were Gentiles. Continue reading here in chapter 2, verse 13. "But now, you who were once far off have been brought near through the shedding of Messiah's blood. For he himself is our shalom. He has made us both one and has broken down the mechitza, or the wall of separation, which divided us, by destroying in his own body the enmity occasioned by the Torah, I'm not sure if that's right translation here, but with his commands and set forth in the form of ordinances. Now, we look at that word ordinances in the Greek text here. What is that text? What is the word there being used for ordinances? It's 15, excuse me. Dogma, right. Is dogma a command from the Almighty? I should be seeing heads going, no. Dogma is a human-derived ordinance or human-derived command. So the Mechitza, the building up of this wall that has divided us, isn't in the form of the Torah being destroyed. Far from it. It's the human ordinances that are designed to keep the people who are not called the circumcised out. And so Paul is saying in this passage that just the circumcised versus the uncircumcised is the Mechitza, in the sense that those who are circumcised from the heart, as we read in this Torah portion, are also being brought near, as it says in verse 13. So there is a breaking down of a Mechitza, but it's not a Mechitza of the Torah. It's a Mechitza of human ordinances saying, no, you guys can't partake in the Messiah of Israel. But that's not what Paul said. That's not what Yeshua did. And so I think we can look at this as we continue reading in this passage. There is a share in the promise when we get down to the end of this passage. So let's keep reading. He does in order to create in union with himself from the two groups a single new humanity and thus make shalom. Verse 16, and in order to reconcile to God both in a single body by being executed on a stake as a criminal and thus killing in himself the enmity. Also, when he came, he announced as good news, shalom to you far off and shalom to those nearby. News that through him we both have access in one spirit to the Father. So then you are no longer foreigners and strangers. On the contrary, you are fellow citizens with God's people and members of God's family. You have built on the foundation of the emissaries and the prophets, with the cornerstone being Yeshua the Messiah himself. In union with him, the whole building is held together, and it is growing into a holy temple in union with the Lord. Yes, in union with him, you yourselves are being built together into a spiritual dwelling place for God. So what this is telling you is that you are no longer strangers. Even though you're supposed to love the stranger, through Messiah and his sacrifice, you are no longer considered strangers. You are now what? What are you if you're no longer a stranger? You're in covenant. And that's where you partake of these covenants. We see it from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Thoughts or comments on that before we go on? Sorry, didn't hear it. I didn't see it. Hand? I'd say this, yes. Yeah, I think the idea is that you are being brought back into the same, from two sheepfolds become one sheepfold, so to speak. Paul does a lot of a discussion on grafting in the wild olive grafted into the root, which of course is Messiah. So we've talked about this concept before, how related those words are, Shema and Shamar. Shema, of course, is the Hebrew word to listen, to hear. It implies doing something else. It implies the Shamar, the obedience, the guarding, the keeping of the mitzvah, keeping of the commandments. It's not just, as we see it, of course, in the Ketuvim Mitzrayim as well. Don't be a hearer only, but also be a doer, which is the same concept here. You can't. It's you can't break apart the hearing from the doing. It's not just hearing and not, if you hear and don't do, it's not really hearing, if that makes sense. You're just sort of, it's falling on deaf ears. So this passage, as well as on the next, as we continue, if you shema and shamar, you will be blessed. We continue reading this. This is from, the first one's from New American Standard. This is from Art Scroll. The carved images of their gods you shall burn in the fire. You shall not covet and take for yourself the silver and gold that is on them, lest you be ensnared by it, for it is an abomination. So you are not to take those as part of the shemaing and shamaring. You don't take those idols and be ensnared by them, because why would you have a command that says don't do this? Because you're going to do it. Did Israel break this mitzvah? And that's why you see, in digs from archaeology, you see all sorts of idols in the digs that were Israelite settlements, not foreigner settlements. Those were Israelite settlements, but they had taken on the divinities of the nations. Yes, Earl.
I was going to say, the king himself did the same thing. So the wisest man on earth, Solomon.
Yeah.
He was clearly warned.
He was warned. Yep.
Clearly warned. Did it anyway.
So idolatry is an abomination. What are some others? Now, other abominations. A lot of them come from Leviticus, Leviticus chapter 18. But not all of them come from there. Throughout the Torah, there's listing of people being defiled by these things. One of them, of course, is involving eating some sort of lizard kind of things, I guess. I think that perhaps one of the things that gets overlooked is what Proverbs says about. It says, these 6 matters Yahweh hates, and 7 are an abomination to him: a proud look, a lying tongue, and hands shedding innocent blood, a heart devising wicked schemes, feet quick to run to evil, a false witness breathing out lies, and one who caused strife among the brethren. So I think when we think of abomination, we often think, as Messianics, we often think of, eating some sort of unclean thing as an abomination, and we think of it as the abomination of a man lying with another man sexually as an abomination. Those are true, but we also need to read and focus on what Proverbs says about that, and measure ourselves against this. False witnesses, as well as causing strife, are considered abominations to Yah. I think we would probably never consider eating a lizard, we would never consider eating a lizard.
Not anymore.
Well,
That's what I would think.
Not anymore.
right. But what about causing strife?
So, would another word for abomination be disgust, maybe?
Well, it's sometimes translated, I say often, sometimes, it's sometimes listed as detestable in some translations.
Well, I guess we need
You're
seems like there's a certain set, obviously there's a certain set of sins that are labeled abomination. I think, like, when someone comes and steals from you, you understand the man, and you're afraid honor among thieves. But when someone just spreads lies about you, it's disgusting. It's like their only intent is to get. It seems like all these things, they have the one thing that makes all these abominations in common is that they're all disgusting. They don't have any good fruit.
Right.
Like whereas, some the other sins you can use them, the injustified means in some people's minds, but not these sins.
Yeah, there's nothing good that comes from any of these, and I can see why it's called abomination. Abomination kind of means to flee from, or to fear, to run away from, to keep distance from, as far away from. You want to be basically, keep it as far away as possible.
What a big problem with this is, what Wayne just said there is we have 3 generations of people in America right now that are running as fast as they can towards them.
Towards these abominations, yeah.
Toward the abominations.
Mm-hmm.
Can't get enough of it. Have to have it.
Ew.
Actually, did you hear about the ancient Hebrew inscription found the abomination? The vomit was actually spelled EAOMBA.
So, but it's a problem.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be running as far as we can, as fast as we can away from them, and we have tons and tons of people, countless people, grasping a hold of it as tight as they can. Can't get there fast enough. And teaching others that it's the right thing to do.
I know that the institution and this management that we have no problem, I guess there's a division in the office.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like in the past few years, you hear a lot of, you hear now in the congregations, tolerance is their, plain tolerance is their biggest virtue, and it seems like everything that is abominable comes back in, all in the manner of being tolerant and bringing peace to the.
Well, the wise words right there.
But it, I guess it's that word, I don't know, I don't know tolerance compatible with, pouring abomination, or I don't know, can you have certain actions that you would call an abomination if you believe in tolerance?
Well, I don't think tolerance applies to these things. You can be tolerant of a lot of things, but there's certain things that you're not to be tolerant of. Like, for example, hands shedding innocent blood. No one should be tolerant of that. But we have that going on in America in, great waves, so to speak, today.
And this is number 19 there, verse 19. That's good for those of you who are coming to the Monday night Bible study. Once we finish Hebraic roots in a few weeks, we're going to talk about that. Number 19.
Right. We also see, of course, it's not just in the Tanakh, but it's also in the Ketuvim Netzarim, where we see about things that are detestable or an abomination. And Yeshua said that for that which is highly esteemed among men, it's detestable in the sight of God. In the Septuagint, the Greek word here for detestable is used in place of to'avah in the Septuagint text. As I mentioned, the kind of the root word of to'avah kind of is to, or the root meaning is to flee, and we see that nad is used in the Aramaic Peshitta text of Luke in this passage from the cognate nadad, to flee. So it's the idea, different word, but it's the word means to flee or to get away from. So our portion in chapter 8 talked about to guard to do every word. It's in chapter 8. Find it here. Note. So it is not really a idea to choose which words you want to guard, but it is the idea of to guard every word. He's verse 2 here says, "You shall remember that Yahweh your Elohim led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you, to prove you, to know what is in your heart, whether you guard his commands or not." So part of that idea of the wilderness experience was to prove yourself faithful. And Israel did not always do that. And that's why they were, in fact, in the wilderness for 40 years, right? Because they didn't guard to do. These commands stand as a unified one. In other words, that's the meaning behind guard to do all these words. is the whole package is there, and the reason given was not because Yah just as a megalomaniac. No, he's telling you these commandments so that you might live. The idea is to do them for your own good. If you do them, you will be blessed. And so, as mentioned earlier, that in the youth challenge, Yeshua said, quoted this passage to the man does not live by bread alone. So, question: Does the quoting the Torah work to keep Satan in his place? The answer, I think, is yes. We mentioned the blessing after meals. Tractate Berachot in the Talmud says that the rabbis discussed about why grace should be said both before and after meals. Of course, we see in the Torah that it's after meals. We know from Yeshua's example, he blessed before as well. So the Talmudic answer, the Talmud agrees with Yeshua's practice, let's say, because the Talmud also says to bless before meals as well. We see that blessing before a couple places in the Ketuvim Netzarim. We also before we go to Deuteronomy Devarim chapter 9. Before we go to this passage, there was one thing that I don't have on a slide, but I'd like to, if you would, take a look in your scriptures in chapter. No, I guess I'm wrong. I'm thinking of 9:18, and so we could go there next. But while I'm thinking about it, let's go to, if you would, go to 9:18 in your Bibles. Devarim 9:18. I fell down before Adonai, as I had the first time for 40 days and nights, during which time I neither ate food nor drank water. So the background for fasting in a Hebraic perspective can be found in Moshe's actions here in chapter 9:18. Within a Jewish heritage or Jewish idea of a fast, it doesn't just mean not eating; it also means not drinking as well. And that's based on Moshe's actions here. Moshe's fast here. So back up now to 9 verse 10, as I got out of sequence a bit. The day, this is from the Septuagint, English translation of the Greek text of a Greek translation of the Hebrew text, uses the term the day of the ecclesia in 9 chapter 10. And so what is 9 chapter 10? Well, when was the day of the ecclesia?
I think perhaps we're talking about Yom Kippur.
I'm going to say it's Shavuot, because when the 10 words were given was a day, on the day of the ecclesia, and so Shavuot. So we see kind of that from this phrase. When was the day of the ecclesia? Well, according to Stephen in the Greek text of the book of Acts, this is the one who was the congregation or the ecclesia in the wilderness. So the day of the ecclesia was the day of the assembly, because the word ecclesia in this sense means assembly, and that was at Shavuot, or at least at Mount Sinai, when the 10 words were given. So traditionally, it's Shavuot or Pentecost. The Aramaic word there is kanushta. You may recognize that. It's a modern word you have heard of. It's similar to that word, same root word, is Knesset. So is there more than one ecclesia? Is there more than one kahal, the Hebrew word that's often translated, ecclesia is translated from? Is there more than one kanushta? Again, I think that answer is no, based on Ephesians. It says there's one body and one spirit, just as also you were called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism. I would say that from this, there's only one body. That means there's only one kanushta, one kahal, one ecclesia. There's not really two, although you can say the ecclesia in the wilderness, because that's where they were. It's not saying this is a different ecclesia, but it's based on chronologically where they were in time, or in geographically and chronologically, if that makes sense. So here's a question. It is a land that Adonai your God cares for. The eyes of Adonai your God are always on it. Has this changed? I agree. I think it's no, has not changed. Will not change. You versus you. What does that mean? Well, you might recognize there's a pretty good parallel between our portion we read here and the Ve'ahavta after the Shema in chapter 6 of the Torah. If you diligently obey my commands, I command you today to love Yahweh your Elohim, serve him with all your heart, all your being. That sounds a lot like the Ve'ahavta. So what's the difference between this and that? Is it a repeat, or is there something different going on here? Well, I think there is something different going on here, because there's a different you. Moshe addressed the you in the Shema and the Ve'ahavta in the singular, as in you. Here, it's in the y'all form. It's in the plural. It's you all. It's a community. So after you Shema and Shamar individually, you join the greater whole, the community, the ecclesia, the kahal, and become part of the y'all. And so your identity becomes part of the mishpacha, as you read last week in 1 Peter, or Kefa Aleph, which reads this way: but you are a chosen people, the king's kohanim, a holy nation, a people for God to possess. Why? In order for you to declare the praises of the one who called you out of the darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Before you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. So it's the same idea we read in the Galatians passage as well as in the Ephesians passage. Kefa, or Peter, says the same thing. So, what questions do you have on the Torah portion? Now, I know one thing I meant to mention it, but in the slide, in this slide, go back a couple of slides here. The difference here is you might recognize in the phrase there that I have in Hebrew, the first word on the right is the Hebrew word im, the aleph mem sofit, the final mem there. And that is the word im. Im shema tishmeu. The im there does mean if. It is not the same word as ekev, because it does mean if. So there is an if meaning to that phrase, ekev, in that sense, because it's talking about keeping the mitzvah. This is an im, it is an if you do this. So that is in this portion, as well as if you diligently obey, if you shamar, if you diligently obey is shema tishmeu. So it's the hearing and doing idea. Okay. So now, what are your questions? The dachshund wants to know when it's lunch. Okay. If no questions, any other comments on the Torah portion in your studies this week you want to discuss before we move on to the Ketuvim Netzrim reading?
I'd like to ask just a little bit of a question about deriving benefit from the gold and silver of idols. Obviously, the way that it's worded on the mitzvah list isn't directly taken from the text. Text is simply to destroy the idols and not keep
Mm-hmm.
anything valuable from them. But I'm thinking in many occupations, we benefit from people having various kinds of things that might in modern terms be considered as items. And I just say, for example, the person who's working at the fast food place is still putting bacon on hamburgers or whatever. And so at what point do you say, hey, you can't be deriving benefit from that?
I'm not sure. You're saying that someone who works in a field that is not basically as a non-kosher chef, something like that. Is that your?
Let's suppose that literally somebody works extracting minerals from the earth and it's gold, and that gold is being shipped off to make something that's used in some religious ceremony as an idol. You're getting paid for extracting or smelting gold or whatever, and it's going for some other use. What I'm saying is basically the way they've written it here, they've sort of reversed it. As opposed to destroying, they're saying to get benefit from it.
Yeah, and that's some of the limitations of sometimes how the mitzvot are written from a in the Jewish perspective of what those mitzvot are. I think that derived benefit from is a gloss. What the text says is to burn those things. It's not really about you selling. It's really it could be used as do not take them though, because that is part of the thing, to not take them. So you can't take them and sell them. That's how you would derive benefit from those.
Right, and the text here also says, don't covet these things because they are a snare.
They will trap you.
They will trap
you. Mm-hmm. So the mitzvah is from Devarim 7:25, which reads something, depending on your translation, reads something like this: you are to burn up completely the carved statues of their gods. Don't be greedy for the silver or gold on them. Don't take it with you, or you'll be trapped by it. It is abhorrent to Adonai your God. And the next one that follows is to not bring something like that into your house, which is next verse. Don't bring something abhorrent into your home, or you will share in the curse that is on it. Instead, you are to detest it completely, loathe it utterly. For it is set apart for destruction. So I think that the idea behind it is to not, the idea of the not get benefit from it is to not keep it and sell it. I don't think that if you're working in a mine and is mining gold, you may derive benefit from what somebody does from it, but that would be the same. I think that there's no way with outside of your control that you can, we derive benefit from police officers working on Shabbat. Yeah.
You're deriving the benefit of just doing the work. Whatever happens with that gold, it's not under your control. But I see what you're saying. If you have knowledge of it, like, I guess that would be a conscious decision you have to make for yourself. I know where this gold goes, and I know what it does, and I'm not going to have anything to do with it anymore.
Well, if it was only a contract to sell gold to, whatever, building a Buddhist temple somewhere, that might be different than.
I get what you're saying there.
That might be different than just open market, though.
At some point, you make a conscious effort to say, I am making money for this company.
Tell me the bacon one. I didn't quite catch the bacon one.
About serving, like to his point, if I was working at McDonald's, and someone ordered a bacon cheeseburger, I'd have hesitation because God said not to do that. And I'm preparing this for someone else to do it.
Yeah. We're in a situation now where
we're in the diaspora. We're in the exile.
We're going to be kind of stuck with some of that.
Is that justified?
Well, I don't know that. I don't get the connection though between bacon on a hamburger and idolatry though. I didn't catch that. How was that in the mitzvah?
Well, in our society, not us particularly, but our society worships bacon. I mean, if you see it on something,
That is a good point.
people worship bacon. I mean, it's lust or whatever you call it, but I mean, it's so different from what the Israelites were for wanting meat. Well, now the thing is, people, their hearts lust after bacon.
You can get bacon sandwich in every Israel now. You can order it, yeah, no, I'm not kidding. It's crazy. And the rabbi said, it's okay if you want to give it to a Gentile, you go ahead and eat it.
Well, I would think one of the connotations today would be like if you held stock and say Planned Parenthood or something. You're making money off of murder. I mean,
Yeah,
so
no one get rid of that.
not the,
Well, if it's directly, then what if you hold a mutual fund? You don't know where all the people are going to be.
I'll give a plug to Dan Celia and Financial Issues. Absolutely, yeah. Anyway,
he's a wonderful nerd.
yes.
I can't remember exactly what it says in the Torah, but I think it's in Leviticus where it allows a person to sell unclean meat, like a pig or something, or
No, it's not really pig. It's the yeah, something that has been like like roadkill. What you're saying?
Sell that to the stranger.
No, if your cow dies, you sell it.
I'm supposed to be savage. Get my car savage.
Who doesn't eat kosher, you can sell it to them, so.
Well, because it's not worth less. I mean, you can derive benefit from making a scarf or making clothing from the hide. That's the idea behind it, my understanding. So it's not worth nothing because it's not edible. It doesn't mean it's worth nothing.
This is really hard to do that. I mean, I thought that it was not for ample time. But, I mean, like, say if someone, gave us a 4,000 pound statue of Buddha to solid gold, that would be really hard to sell. Because it's worth so much. I know,
That'd be a big fire.
I'm telling you.
but you can justify so many things you could do with that.
So what I mean is, if you melt it down, you cannot use it in your bullet molds. She didn't specify it was gold. Maybe gold plated. I don't know. All right, let's move on to First Kepha, chapter 3. So kind of as a way of review, some of the things we've talked about in previous weeks. Where does Kepha stand in the quote canon of Scripture? It is in the Greek text canon. It is not in the Peshitta Aramaic text canon. At least 2 Peter. 1 Peter is. 2 Peter is not. 2 Peter is part of the Western Five. We're studying 1 Peter today, but just as a way of looking at it, is part of the Western Five by the Eastern. The Assyrian Church of the East, aka the Church of the East. It is in the Peshitta canon of the Syriac Orthodox Church. It is not in talking 2 Peter, not 1 Peter. It is written from Babylon, according to what Peter says in chapter 5. What does Babylon mean? Well, the majority opinion that Babylon is a code word for Rome, although the majority opinion isn't followed by some pretty famous commentators or people who have had a weighty role in Christendom, so to speak. Erasmus, who supplied the text for the King James translation, and John Calvin, who was certainly a very famous commentator. Both of those said what's meant here isn't Rome, but actual Babylon, Mesopotamian Babylon. The Church of the East tradition, on the other hand, said that Kepha, Peter, wrote it from Babylon while he was there, while he was founding the assembly in Babylon. And that, as you remember from Ezra, Nehemiah, the book of Esther as well, that there were a lot of Jews left behind in Babylon even after the return to the land. And that just as Shaul or Paul went west, Kepha went east. He wrote the letter in Aramaic from Babylon, that he was there many years before he ever went to Rome. Some of the things we covered in previous weeks, kind of as a way of review. So looking at this, and I apologize for the text being kind of hard to read. I tried to enlarge it a little bit, kind of got it a little bit out of sequence, or not out of sequence, but harder. It's just not easy to read. But this is starting from a quote from, I got it from the Jewish New Testament commentary by David Stern, but it's actually a quote from Midrash Tanchuma, which is dates from the 8th or 9th century. And the Midrash has a lot of things to say in it that are kind of similar to what Peter wrote. One of them is from this. It says, Abraham's wife honored him and called him Lord, for it is written that Sarah said, my Lord is old, from Genesis 18:12. But conversely, God commanded Abraham to honor his wife by calling her princess, for that is the meaning of her Hebrew name, Sarah. The Hebrew word in Genesis 18:12 is Adoni, or my Lord or my master. It's not Adonai, but it's derived from the same root, Adon. So Peter said that that is a banner of respect for both sides, and that's what Midrash Tanchuma says as well. So continuing the commentary here, this is again from Stern's commentary. Respect her as if, or as a fellow heir of the gift of life. And it's, another reference to Ephesians, this time verse 5:21. And then if you don't, your prayers will be blocked. I found his commentary here kind of humorous. This is a portentous warning. A man who does not respect his wife might try to retreat into prayer, but he will be unable to have a good spiritual life so long as he does not love, understand, and honor his wife. Any husband who has attempted to pray privately while in the midst of a fight with his wife should agree.
Wow,
I thought that was well said.
very well.
So if you check your Bibles, there is a difference in translations from different Greek texts in chapter 3, verse 13. And you can tell where your Bible, which text your Bible is translated from, by how you translate a particular word, or not word, but what word is being translated from. I guess be a better way of saying that. So it's a difference between a word that means zealous or a word that means imitator. For example, the New American Standard reads this way: "Who is there to harm you if you prove zealous?" The word zelotai from zelotes, excuse me, which is good. And that's New American Standard, but others as well. And then the King James reads, "And who is that that will harm you if you be followers, mimetai from mimetes, imitators of that which is good." So you can see the English word imitator, I think is derived, you can see, from the Greek word mimetai or mimetes. Very, very kind of similar thing there. So what might explain the Greek textual differences? Textus Receptus and the Byzantine majority text read imitators, whereas the Alexandrian text translates to zealous. Now, you can see those Greek words look nothing like each other. It's not a scribal error, right? You can't say that someone looked at zelotai and wrote mimetai there, right? They do not look similar. What does the Aramaic say? Might be a good place to go next. Oh, you must have seen my slides. I don't know. So the reason, in my view, why these are, at least one explanation for this, and I think it might be a pretty good one. The differences between these two could be explained by what is known as a split word. A split word is where one word can be translated in two different ways. And so the Aramaic word tanana, from the root word tanan, can mean, it can mean any of these things depending on the context. I'll just cover the highlighted ones: to be zealous, to imitate, to arouse someone's zeal, or to emulate. So emulate and imitate are very similar, and the zeal ones are similar as well. So could it be possible? Could it be possible? Is it plausible that a Greek translator reading from the Aramaic text, Tanana, one translated as zealous and the other translated as imitator? Because either one could make sense in the context we read. Both of those ideas are within the bounds of possibility: imitate or zeal or zealous.
Or could it be the translator from the Peshitta read both?
Well, then you have to go back to figure out how did that difference get in there. That doesn't. If it was a translation from the Peshitta, you couldn't really. That doesn't answer the question of why did one have mimetai and one have zelotai.
You have to account for the difference before you can,
I keep my day job.
Fine.
yeah.
Now, we can't say with certainty what happened because we can't interview Zorba who translated that, right?
Trying to make sure the family.
Oh, maybe my humor. I often don't see humor, and I see humor a lot, but usually most people think that what I think is funny. Most people don't. Anyway, so 1 Peter 3:18. There's the word that's interesting. I mean, I thought it was very interesting here. The complete Jewish Bible wasn't translated from the Peshitta text, but it reads the same, and it's not really a difference between Greek and Aramaic here. But I thought it was very interesting the way it reads here, and it reads this way: "For Messiah himself died for sins once and for all, a righteous person on behalf of unrighteous people, so that he might bring you to God. He was put to death in the flesh, but brought to life by the Spirit." The word you can see there is barucha in Aramaic, which certainly rucha is a cognate for the Hebrew ruach. So you could certainly say that Yeshua was brought to life by the ruach. But let's compare. That's what Peter wrote here. Let's compare to 1 Corinthians chapter 6. So I don't have a slide that shows that, so you have to find it for yourself in your own Bibles. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14, and it has a different, I don't know if you'd say a different take on it, but what it says is something like, God raised up the master, and he will raise us up too by his power. So most people look at that and say, well, that what is meant by here is the Father. That the Father raised Yeshua up, according to chapter 6 of 1 Corinthians.
Right.
So could it be possible that the Father raised up Yeshua by the Ruach? The Ruach obeyed what the Father said to do. So I think that's how you can't. That's how you could reconcile those two verses. One might imply the Father, and one says the Ruach.
Okay, and then 1 Corinthians clears it up on saying it was Elohim himself.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Not the Ruach obeying Elohim's word.
Yeah. So one Father, one Spirit, one Master. Okay. Well, let's continue on here. We're almost finished here, but here's a commentary from last week. That's the chosen people commentary. I wanted to just kind of highlight because I thought it was it connected to what we read in the Torah as well. The idea of being a peculiar people, as the King James reads, a chosen people, the king's Kohanim, a holy nation, a people for God to possess. So in the talk, these terms are applied to the Jewish people, Israel. Kefa applies them to the readers of his letter. According to our note from 1:1, are firstly Messianic Jews, and secondly, Messianic Gentiles from the nations who truly identify with them. And comparing back to Romans, many Christian theologians have used this verse as evidence the church or the Christians have replaced Israel, the Jews. But if I'm right about this, who the readers of the letter were, then these Christian theologians are wrong. Even if I was wrong about the readers, replacement theology is inconsistent with Romans and other references, including Matthew. I would put it this way, and he says, oops, let me go and find it right here. Oops, I'd put it this way. Christians are indeed a chosen people, priests for the king, a holy nation in a metaphorical sense, a people set aside for God to possess, not by way of superseding the Jews as God's people, but by way of being joined to them by faith in the same God in the Jewish Messiah and in the Jewish Messiah. A so-called Christian who opposes or looks down on the Jews as merely God's former people has missed the point altogether and is probably not a Christian at all. We talked about this last week, but our Torah portion actually got us back to chapter 2, so I wanted to bring that up as well. So now, finally, what are your questions about what we just looked at in 1 Peter? Yep, that's not a question, though. Oh.
So, when I never,
Is that the same dog?
I know I never caught that it said it was written in Babylon.
Yeah,
That
chapter 5.
sound blows the whole Peter founding straight wrong.
Well, I mean, what again, the majority opinion within Christendom as a whole, is that Rome is being thought of when he said Babylon as a. I think it's based on, as looked at a couple of weeks ago, primarily based on how it seems that Rome and Babylon are used. Rome's used that way, or Babylon's used that way, potentially in Book of Hikalut or Revelation. Yes.
Could there be a difference between Peter saying Babylon meaning Babylon, and in John the Revelator, mystery Babylon being different?
I think he's talking about Babylon 5.
Mystery Babylon, would that be considered Babylon itself, or would it be considered something metaphoric in the place of?
Well, many think of it as being a euphemism for Rome. The Roman, I mean, commonly anyway.
So what Peter's talking about is literal Babylon.
All right. If you would please stand for the Aaronic blessing.
Vichunecha Isa Adonai Panav Elecha V'yasem Lecha Shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you shalom.
Well, thank you for joining us. Shalom, shalom.
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. That's right.
Oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down. Oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down. Oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down. Let the mountains shake, let the earth be moved, that the nations may tremble at your presence. Let your fire burn, let the waters boil, let your name be known to this generation, and come down. That you would rend the heavens and come down. Oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down. Will you restrain yourself any longer? Don't hide your face in your anger. When Jerusalem is suppressed by the nations, the place of your throne, a desolation come down.